Welcome to Books for Success. Today, we're delving into the wisdom within The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. The Brothers Karamazov, 1879, follows the events, machinations, and tragedies of the Karamazov family over the course of 4 critical days in an unnamed town in Russia. As tensions within the household simmer and seethe into a stunning climax, we are treated to one of the most penetrating explorations of religion, faith, and doubt in all of world literature. Before we begin, subscribe and ring the bell for notifications if you want to keep receiving the knowledge of book summaries about health, wealth, love, psychology, and much more. Don't be shy about dropping your book suggestions for us to summarize. Also, you can use this video as an audiobook summary. Let's grow and succeed together. What's in it for me? A masterpiece of modern literature. Fyodor Dostoyevsky. The Brothers Karamazov. There are some who say Fyodor Dostoyevsky is second only to William Shakespeare as the greatest writer of all time. He is also an inordinately complex writer in terms of his ability to embed deep philosophical and psychological ideas into a thrilling, interwoven narrative. No writer ever excavated into the basement of the human mind quite like Dostoyevsky. He dragged all of human nature's darkest and most uncomfortable tendencies, cruelty, evil, criminality, sadism, out into the cold light of day, scrutinizing them and their consequences like a scientist examining cause and effect. We read Dostoyevsky partly because it shows us, chillingly, what we're capable of. The Brothers Karamazov is his last book and regarded as his crowning achievement. The dense, 900-page tome is a complex story rich with subplots, symbolism, deep philosophical debates and memorable characters pursuing their own agendas. It's a sophisticated machine containing a dazzling number of perfectly calibrated parts all whirring and humming in harmony. It makes you wonder, how could this work have sprung from the mind of a single human being? We could never do justice to all of these things in such a short amount of time, but what we can do is sketch out the main characters and storyline and explain the most significant themes in the book. The conflict between atheism and religion, reason and faith, logic and belief. By the time you finish this summary, you'll know the overall story of the book and why so many people consider it one of the greatest achievements in world literature. If you'd like to listen to a very short summary of the storyline right away, you can also skip to the last section. And with that, let's begin. Chapter 1. It's a family affair. Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov is a foul and gluttonous man. He spent his youth drinking, womanizing and cheating his way to a small fortune. He is deliberately vulgar, insulting and takes a twisted delight in riling up those around him. From his misspent youth come 4 sons from 3 different women, the brothers Karamazov. Dmitri is the eldest. A 28-year-old soldier, Dmitri has inherited some negative tendencies from his father. Although he's a hedonist who enjoys long, champagne-fueled drinking bouts, he also has a moral compass. He would never take part in the depraved orgies his father enjoys so much, and his burning hatred toward him is equaled only by his unconditional love for his brothers. At the start of the novel, Dmitri has just returned to his father's home to claim an inheritance left to him by his mother. This is the event that sparks the plot into life and will eventually grow into an inferno. The intellectual Ivan is next. Ivan has a brilliant, radiant mind, but he's also cold, aloof and overly logical. A determined and impassioned atheist, he will lecture anyone prepared to listen on how God doesn't exist, right and wrong are human constructions, and the philosophical system he's devised to explain all of this. The third brother is Alyosha. A deeply religious man, Alyosha contains within him a pure heart, overflowing with genuine love for the world and everything in it. Guided by the teachings of his spiritual mentor, Father Zosima, Alyosha would never speak ill of someone or treat them unkindly, not even his reprobate father. Finally, there's Smerdyakov. When his mother, who was mentally ill, became pregnant with him, all the townsfolk agreed that Fyodor Pavlovich was the only man depraved enough to seduce this vulnerable girl. Fyodor never treated Smerdyakov as a son. Instead, he had him raised by the butler and employed him as a lowly servant. Perhaps because of this rejection and abuse, Smerdyakov develops a vicious and poisonous personality. One of the most important things to remember about the Brothers Karamazov is that it's a philosophical novel. That means Dostoyevsky is using the book to explore rich and absorbing ideas, and there's even an argument to be made that the plot and its characters become secondary in importance to the high-blown themes the author is attempting to explore. Unquestionably, the most important philosophical clash here is the contrast between religion and atheism, spirituality and logic. What's better, a world guided by faith or scientific skepticism? Can the bonds of community hold together without God? Which system would allow human happiness to flourish more greatly? These are the questions Dostoyevsky is asking and answering in the Brothers Karamazov. One of the author's principal techniques is to make his characters stand as symbols for the differing viewpoints. By turning Ivan into a vehicle for logical atheism and Alyosha into a vehicle for spiritual faith, Dostoyevsky not only embeds these ideas within a storyline for us to follow, he also allows the most unbiased argument to be put forward for each side. To be sure, Dostoyevsky had his own personal viewpoint, but he realized that if he offered the strongest possible case for the side he didn't agree with, it would feel comprehensive when he ultimately refuted it. Fyodor, Dmitri, and Smerdyakov also have their roles to play as symbols in wonderful, complicated ways which make you truly marvel at Dostoyevsky's genius. We'll explore their characters more soon. Chapter 2: Hostility in a Holy Place. Curiosity in a holy place. With the strange and disjointed Karamazov family further torn apart by Fyodor and Dmitri's dispute over inheritance, they decide to visit Alyosha's monastery and ask Father Zosima to mediate for them. The visit is a disaster. Not only is Dmitri late, but it's clear that Fyodor has only agreed to attend in order to irritate and insult everyone. He particularly delights in telling the monks, Father Zosima included, a series of profane and impious stories. During the visit, another point of conflict between Fyodor and Dmitri is revealed as well. They are both pursuing the love of a young, beautiful, but fickle woman named Grushenka. For Dmitri, who acts on emotions and impulses alone, it doesn't matter that he's already engaged to a woman named Katerina. He even stole 3,000 rubles from his fiancée to finance a trip away with Grushenka. Father and son are at each other's throats. Later, Dmitri even threatens to kill Fyodor. Meanwhile, Ivan asserts to the Christian monks his belief that morality, the very idea of right and wrong, is completely dependent on the idea of an afterlife. If there wasn't the prospect of paradise or the threat of eternal suffering in the next life, people wouldn't care about acting morally. They would only act in their own best interest, give in to any form of pleasure, and take whatever they wanted on a whim. Despite this train wreck of inappropriate behavior, in a monastery no less, Father Zosima is unruffled. Throughout his time in the story, he projects an aura of complete tranquility and gentle authority, a placid lake whose still waters run deep. He loves the world and all living things, and nothing can shake the foundations of his faith. Father Zosima tells Fyodor that if he wishes to join the angels in heaven, he has to stop lying to himself. Then, mysteriously, he kneels at the feet of Dmitri, telling him that he will suffer greatly. In this part of the novel, Dostoyevsky fleshes out the specific roles his other characters play in his grand philosophical debate. Most obvious here is Father Zosima. Like Alyosha, he embodies a doctrine of love and faith and of a confident harmony with the world. Zosima sees truth and love as indistinguishable from one another, and this is why he implores Fyodor to stop lying. If someone is dishonest, they lose their ability to believe in themselves. From this grows suspicion of others, and with this suspicion comes an inability to love. In this way, dishonesty sweeps away the foundations of affection. Truth and love are woven together into the same fabric. Another vital theme that Dostoyevsky has Zosima explain is how moral responsibility is caught up in a gigantic, interconnected web. We should practice forgiveness and refrain from judging each other because, like the butterfly effect, the consequences of our actions are so complex and far-reaching that we all bear some responsibility for the crimes and sins of others. Soon we'll see how his themes of faith versus reason and the ubiquity of responsibility come to change the story in dramatic ways. Chapter 3: Atheism and the Burden of Free Will. Freedom and the Burden of Free Will. After the fiasco of the monastery, the novel moves its focus to the tender, loving Alyosha. Visiting Dmitri's unwanted fiancée, Katerina, he finds his brother Ivan there. It's clear the two are in love. He has dinner with Ivan that night, and the man of reason and the man of faith inevitably get embroiled in a discussion over religion. Ivan begins to put forward his case. First, he tells Alyosha he can accept the idea that a perfectly good, perfectly loving God would permit so much suffering in the world. The common response to this is that God is either testing our faith or punishing us for our sins. But what about children? Christianity teaches that children up to a certain age are sinless. How could a loving, caring God inflict such anguish on innocent, sinless children? Next, Ivan reads a poem to Alyosha called The Grand Inquisitor. In it, Christ has been miraculously reborn in Spain during the height of the Spanish Inquisition. After tending to the sick and needy, he is promptly arrested by the religious authorities. Christ is visited in his cell by the Grand Inquisitor, who explains the reason for his arrest. Christ made a fatal mistake when he previously walked the earth. He cursed humanity with the gift of free will. As recorded in the New Testament, while Christ wandered the desert during 40 days of fasting, he was visited by Satan and presented with 3 temptations. By denying these temptations, the Inquisitor explains, Christ secured free will for humanity, the freedom to behave as one chooses, whether that be moral or immoral. For the Inquisitor, this was a grievous error. Free will is an excruciating burden for mankind. We have the power to choose to follow Christ, but most people aren't strong enough to hold on to their faith in the face of temptation and the impossibility of ever knowing if God exists. Because of this, most people live sinful lives riddled with guilt until they die and are damned for eternity. What Christ should have done, the Inquisitor says, is accepted the devil's temptations. He should have taken power and given humanity security, rather than freedom. We can't agonize over choosing to sin if we don't have a choice. The Grand Inquisitor story and the Brothers Karamazov is one of the most famous passages in the history of literature and one of the strongest arguments against the existence of God ever formulated. Although it's nested within the larger context of the novel, this passage has taken on a life of its own and has been extensively studied for its philosophical and theological implications, particularly in discussions about faith, free will, and the nature of good and evil. While the Grand Inquisitor has since been used in arguments against faith and religious institutions, Dostoyevsky's own views are more complex. He uses the story to question and challenge, but not reject, faith. A deeply spiritual man himself, Dostoyevsky seems to view faith as a personal, complex journey which is reflected in the poem. With this stunning chapter on the problem of free will and religion, Dostoyevsky has assembled all of his philosophical cards. All that's left now is to play his hand. Chapter 4: Crime and Punishment. Remember how back in the monastery, Father Zosima kneeled at Dmitri's feet and foretold he would suffer greatly. As we enter the novel's climax, it's time for the wise sage to be proven right. By this point in the story, the eldest Karamazov brother is an erratic, unpredictable mess. Consumed by fury and jealousy, he convinces himself that Grushenka is at his father's house. Breaking into his father's estate, he manically searches for the woman he loves. His madness and frenetic behavior only builds as he goes from room to room. All of a sudden, at the height of Dmitri's rage, there's a gap in the story. Dostoyevsky is recreating a blackout or a complete manic breakdown. When Dmitri comes to, he is running away from his father's estate and covered in blood. After learning that Grushenka is with a former lover, he resolves to kill himself after an orgy of food and drink. Before that, though, he must see Grushenka one final time. Once Grushenka sees the two men together, she realizes that she truly loves Dmitri. It's at this moment that the police burst in. Dmitri is under arrest for the murder of his father, Fyodor. The amount of evidence against Dmitri is staggering. Full in his hatred for his father, even threatening to kill him at one point, Dmitri was also seen fleeing Fyodor's house in a blood-stained shirt on the night he was murdered. In short, he had motive and he was spotted at the scene of the crime. It's no surprise at Dmitri's subsequent trial, he is found guilty and sentenced to exile in Siberia. But there's a twist. Smerdyakov, the ignored and malicious brother, confesses to Ivan that he killed their father, not Dmitri. What's more, he was inspired to finally murder Fyodor by Ivan's opinions on atheism and the meaninglessness of morality. Shortly thereafter, we see Smerdyakov hang himself and Ivan, riven by guilt, descend into a hallucinatory madness where he is tormented by the devil himself. Despite this downward spiral, the novel ends on a somewhat upbeat note. Katerina visits Dmitri in his cell and the two ex-lovers forgive each other. Dmitri gives his blessing to her and Ivan's relationship and she begins to nurse the insane brother back to health. She also helps plan Dmitri's eventual escape from exile and immigration to America with Grishenka. That then is how this magnificent novel ends. Now that we know the overarching plotline, let's look over the final third of the book again, this time seeing how it meshes with the significant themes and messages Dostoyevsky was so keen to communicate. In the great battle between faith and reason, Dostoyevsky powerfully demonstrated the dangers of the philosophy of atheism and doubt. It leads to suspicion, paranoia, and isolation from other human beings. He clearly shows this by making the story's chief representative of atheism, Ivan, partly responsible for his father's death. After all, he implanted the idea in Smerdyakov that there's no such thing as right and wrong. In a clever twist, Dostoyevsky shows us what a world without morality looks like. Simultaneously, he supports Zosima's argument that moral responsibility doesn't rest within one single person, but is distributed among a tangled web. Smerdyakov might have killed his father, but he only did so because of Ivan's toxic, self-centered philosophy. Dostoyevsky further underlines the strength of faith and love by proving Zosima right in a different way. Ultimately, we realize that Dmitri has suffered greatly, just as the monk prophesied. By structuring his story so that Zosima is proven right time and time again, Dostoyevsky is affirming the philosophy of love, faith, and kindness. He seems to be saying that through these values, we are better able to understand truth and the workings of the world. Final words. Here's a brief recap. Dmitri Pavlovich has just returned to the house of his father, Fyodor, a crass, crude, and self-centered man. Fyodor has three other sons, the logical and academic Ivan, the kind and spiritual Alyosha, and the illegitimate and mean-spirited Smerdyakov, who Fyodor doesn't treat as a son and instead employs as a servant. Dmitri detests his father, and they begin to clash, not only over the issue of inheritance, but also over a woman, the beautiful but fickle Grishenka. In one exchange, Dmitri assaults Fyodor and threatens to kill him. Dmitri might already be engaged to another woman, Katerina, but that hardly stops him from pursuing Grishenka. He even steals 3,000 rubles from his fiancée to pay for a trip away with her. The cold and intelligent Ivan, meanwhile, is in love with his brother's unwanted fiancée. He is also a loud and confident atheist. When discussing philosophy with his half-brother, Smerdyakov, he tells him that if there is no God, right and wrong do not exist. Morality is simply a tool for controlling people by promising them a fictional afterlife in heaven. Meanwhile, Dmitri flies into a jealous rage over Grishenka. He is convinced she is at his father's house. Dmitri breaks in, assaults the butler, and leaves without finding her. Fyodor, meanwhile, has been found murdered. All evidence points to Dmitri. He had motive, and he was spotted with blood on his shirt leaving his father's house. But Smerdyakov confesses to Ivan that he murdered Fyodor. And what's more, Ivan is partly to blame for his murder because he taught Smerdyakov there is no such thing as evil in a godless world. Driven by guilt, Ivan descends into insanity, and Smerdyakov hangs himself. At his trial, Dmitri is found guilty and sentenced to exile in Siberia. Katerina begins to take care of Ivan and forgives Dmitri. She even starts to arrange his escape to America with Grishenka. Thanks for being part of our insightful voyage. If our summary piqued your interest, we encourage you to dive into the complete book for a deeper understanding. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more content if you're new here, and share it with others who might find it valuable. Keep on reading, discovering, and advancing until our next adventure.